Good morning, Mr. Rivas. Go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Hello, Mayor, Council. Raymond Rivas, Director of Neighborhood Services. Today I'm going to be giving just a quick quarterly update as far as some of our accomplishments and also present some challenges and some recommendations going into the next year. Today's primary focus is primarily going to be over our environmental code and our neighborhood vitality division. So we've accomplished quite a bit in here that we're proud of. Some of those include the development of that I think impact our neighborhoods directly, and this is the implementation of our neighborhood vitality program, where we hired our manager, Yolanda Wilson, and she's been out there boots on the ground meeting with residents and neighborhood groups. We also conducted our first inaugural neighborhood summit, which some of you attended, and we were really excited about the turnout, and I'll have some statistics for you as far as later on how many people attended. We've also seen some growth in some of our established programs. Some of those include our Code Ambassador program. We actually had an orientation last night where we had some interested folks that are ready to get out in the community. We will also be plugging away as far as advertising between our between our next class, or our first class, excuse me. Last night was just an orientation, but it is not too late for interested parties to still be a part of this upcoming class. So we'll be advertising that as well moving forward between now and later in March. We've also seen the aggressiveness as far as code enforcement. That's something that you asked our city manager to do, and in turn I've been instructed to make sure our staff is out there being aggressive, that we are utilizing every tool that we have, and using our resources that we're given to our maximum capacity. So without further ado, I will go through some of those here in a second. I just wanted to give a reminder as far as what neighborhood services touches as far as some of your goals and priorities. As you can see, we touched quite a few, and I also wanted to include this in case you want to reference back between or throughout my presentation if you have some ideas or something along those lines as far as that would address some of these goals moving forward. That's what this is here for. Now, you saw Chief Cato's presentation. I come from a public safety background. I think Cliff teases me a little bit about being a number nerd as well, and that's just what public safety does. Fire, police, they have their performance measures, their benchmarking data that they measure success on, and I took the same approach when I came aboard as far as taking the helm of being over neighborhood services. So some of the things just to highlight here. You can see put the last 3 years as far as for the first quarter comparisons when it comes to violations identified proactively. Now this means our code officers going out there. This is not complaints. This is out driving their areas, which they do about every few weeks. Their areas are quite expansive, but they are required to drive through every part of their area at least once a month, if not more than that, depending on the size of their area. And this is things that they notice when they're out there being proactive. So you can see we had about a 60% increase over our last fiscal year. And some of those are, and I put our top violations that we identified in some of the numerical background as far as what those were. So you can see trash and debris, high weeds and grass, overhanging limbs, and nuisance premise. Now, moving forward, we're about to enter the springtime. You'll see probably by the time I give an update to you the next quarter is that you're going to see high weeds and grass make a big jump, because this time of year we're mainly focused on cleaning up properties because there's never a dull moment in code. If we're not out there in the springtime addressing the high weeds and grass, we're looking at property condition. So staff is always fully engaged in looking for those violations. As far as our complaints submitted, I like to say that, you might see an uptick. We did see a 19% increase over last year, but I don't see this as a bad thing. We've had Town Hall Tuesday meetings, Neighborhood Summit. We are pushing out the message how residents can report violations to us. And I think that we're seeing that we're experiencing a more engaged community. So I think that a lot of this can be attributed to residents digesting that information and actually using some of the tools that we're pushing out there. So that's working with Wayne Larson's group as far as the new app that we rolled out as far as about a year ago, where residents can report something on their mobile phone, or they can call it in. We have an anonymous hotline. They can come to our office and report something. So all of these, we are trying to engage with the public, so I don't see this increase as a bad thing. I think that actually I find it as a good opportunity to make sure that we're addressing their concerns. As far as violations contracted, now this is where we go out and we abate a issue. This is almost the quickest way for us to address concerns out in the community, where we have actually 3 contractors, and between those 3 contractors, there's approximately 8 to 9 crews that are out there. Whenever we submit something, they're out there to take care of the problem within 3 days is what they have been instructed. We did see a slight decrease here, and that's mainly because our folks were so aggressive last year. We used up all of the funds that we could quicker than what we thought, so we actually had to submit a new request for proposal, and we got our contractors under a new contract. So the dip here is mainly because of that. Also, the previous fiscal year, for those of you that don't remember this time of year last year, it was a very rainy season, so we saw a lot of late fall growth as far as vegetative growth. That's overhanging limbs and high weeds and grass. So we were really busy last year. So we haven't quite seen that same amount, although I'm glad to see that we have blue skies out there. It seems like we had rain almost every day this week, but it was not to the same extent that we saw our previous fiscal year. So again, I put our top 4 violations that we have been contracting. A lot of those are the same reflective violations that you saw on one of your previous slides as far as what we identified proactively. As far as citations issued, I think that this is one of the things that is a good benchmark as far as aggressiveness goes. We saw a 97.1 increase over last year as far as code staff issuing citations. And this is based on feedback that we heard from you. If we have repeat offenders that we're contracting properties, we're also issuing a citation to go along with that. So they're kind of getting a lien put on their property for the work that we did, as well as they're going to have to answer through our court system as far as for being a repeat offender. So I think that this shows our staff being aggressive. And I saw a green light.
Okay. And I'm just trying to understand the chart.
Sure.
So the purple in progress, and I understand that these are citations issued from October to December.
Correct.
So in progress means exactly what?
In progress means that we sent the citation either through summons, or there is a court date that has been set that has not yet occurred. So there's actually a couple of things that we lump in progress. It takes anywhere from a conservative estimate would be 30 to 60 days sometimes to set a court date, or if we have to reschedule. So if I ran this report today, that number would change, because that would mean that folks are every time we have a code docket that we're chipping away at that number. But to give you as concise explanation as I can, that means that it's just making its way through the court process, that they may not have set their court date or had a hearing yet.
Fair enough. I'm not complaining about
Sure.
that. I'm trying to understand that number. So code docket, and forgive me for being old, 15%. What does code docket mean?
Code docket is where it's either about to transition into a case where we've done a preliminary hearing with our prosecutor. So when you set a date, when you first get a citation, you set a date, and we have an initial meeting with the prosecutor as well as our code staff to justify. So we have pictures and we discuss with the resident what the violation, what the charge is. So a code docket would be that we've had an initial meeting with the resident, and they have most likely opted to go and set a trial, either a jury trial or to a bench trial with a judge.
So let me understand this. So your code docket, is that in the court or is that a meeting somewhere else?
That is in the court, yes, sir.
And so it's like some cities call them initial appearance dockets or first appearance. If somebody has an attorney, it might be an attorney appearance docket. And if you know roughly this code docket setting, what's the percentage rate of disposition? Like you have this meeting, gee whiz, I'm so sorry I didn't cut my grass. Here, let me plead guilty, pay a fine. What roughly is the disposition of these code docket meetings? If you know, and if you don't know, I understand. But
I don't know, but the feedback that your previous budget year we funded a code attorney, and the feedback that I'm hearing from my staff is that the code attorney who's been making all these code dockets since he started is both fair but also aggressive, and I've actually heard a lot of great feedback. So a lot of times he's holding residents accountable as far as a lot of them are settling. I don't have that number, but some are opting, a good percentage of that are opting to go ahead and resolve the issue at that initial appearance period.
through a plea bargain.
Correct.
Okay. Court date no-shows, 6%. So, and again, I'm trying to understand all of these. So, in progress 42 sounds like they either haven't had a date set, or they've had a date set but they haven't gone to it
Or
yet.
they just didn't appear. So
You
they
mean
set a date.
and the citation went to warrant status.
I would have to get clarification on that. If we have enough information on the individual to issue a warrant, we had to have identifiable information tied to that before
It
warrant.
could go to warrant status. It might not if you don't have enough information to issue a warrant.
Correct.
So there are instances where we issue citations and no one responds, and it does not go into warrant status.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
I don't have that exact figure, but you are correct.
All right, so in progress, no meeting yet, 42%. Then code docket, 15%, which is meetings with our code attorney, the defendant, maybe an attorney, the code inspector. There's a certain percentage that get resolved here. The 6% is we've got this date set, but no one shows up at it.
Correct.
Again, maybe it goes to warrant status, maybe it doesn't go to warrant status, depending upon whether we have enough information to issue a warrant.
Yes, sir.
And so case is closed, resolved, and that, just so you know, that scares me, but I'm open to whatever you're saying on this. Closed, resolved, is this dispositions including I've gotten a ticket in the mail and I mail in my fine, I get a ticket in the mail, I go to this code docket, and I decide to plea bargain it. Is that inclusive of all of that, 21%?
Yes, this is a kind of what I tried to do to make this a little bit more digestible is exactly what you're talking about, combine some of the dispositions. So those do include that a fine was paid, that there was I'm just trying to get at that, yes, that means that it's been resolved as far as gone through the process and we've gotten some type of settlement out of it.
Well, and so then this last part here, I'm not worried about pending appeals. It's 1%. That's going to happen. But
Sure.
dismissed by prosecutor is also 15%. So let me understand the exact same number of cases, or roughly the same number of cases, that go to this pretrial meeting, the exact same number as that also are recommended to be dismissed by the prosecutor, and that dismissal recommendation is followed by the judge?
Or, for instance, if we found that there was some type of hardship, or if the resident resolved the issue, let's say that it was their first time to receive a citation.
Regardless of the circumstance, our city attorney staff is recommending dismissal, and the judge is following that recommendation, right?
Yes.
And that's the same number as goes to this pretrial docket.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand the numbers so that I know what's going on.
No problem.
Don't read anything into the questions. I'm just, at this point, just trying to understand the process.
Sure. My job is to be transparent with you as well. So if I can explain it, then I will do my best.
Thank you.
No problem. Is there any other questions as far as the citation dispositions? All right. This is something that I like to kind of, this is what makes me happy as far as I tell my staff we want compliance, ultimately, is what our ultimate goal is. We want the issue resolved. Obviously, we rather the residents take care of the issues on their own, but if not, that's where we utilize the other tools in our toolbox. So 89% compliance as far as overtime is something that I think means that our residents are starting to see how aggressive we are being and taking us serious in resolving issues once they receive that first notice of violation. So this is something, again, that I say it also correlates to the success of our staff as far as their customer service. Obviously, like I'll use an example this week, we saw a number of days with rain. You know, if somebody needs an extension as far as if they had high weeds or grass or needed to trim their limbs, we're obviously not going to ask them to endanger themselves or tear up their yards to resolve the issue. We're going to extend some more time to resolve that issue. But regardless, I think that you saw a few months ago the survey results that our staff, we do try to at least have a compassionate side working with residents to get this resolved on their own. If not, well, then that's where if we've given them a chance and they don't take advantage of that, then that's where we have no problems kicking it up a notch and being aggressive. This is a new benchmark, and you probably saw this on our last memo that I sent. This is something that I think is important to denote and for you to see, because sometimes you'll see comments throughout the community or be asked, well, how long does it take for a code case to work through the process? Well, the answer to that question is 23 days, and this is from the point that we noticed a violation and a notice of violation letter was sent to a resident to when we consider it closed resolved, meaning that we issued a citation, it was submitted for abatement with our contractor, or it was voluntarily taken care of by the resident. Our rough goal moving in, because this is, again, a new benchmark for us and for our office, is 30 days. So we will evaluate, making our goal more aggressive, but since this was kind of our goal, our first go around at this benchmark, that is kind of what we went with. To kind of give you a rough estimate, another community, and this is a fairly new measure, so there's not a lot of benchmarking data to compare ourselves to, but one community I did find in Texas was the city of Austin. Their goal was 45 days, and their time to resolve was 36.3 days. So as you can see, our staff is really efficient as far as moving it through the process as far as each case is concerned. So be looking for more data on that moving forward. Some other things that we've done as far as one of your goals for us was increase effectiveness of environmental code programs. So what we've done in this last quarter is we've implemented a new policies and procedures manual. This is so staff is operating on the same sheet of music, if you will, that there is no misunderstanding as far as what their expectations are. So that's something that was adopted as far as this first quarter. It's also, I'm big on accountability. Your job as council is to hold us accountable. Well, I'm holding my staff accountable. If we're not seeing that our staff is being as aggressive as we can, and I'm looking at each of our areas, I'm looking at those numbers as well as our field supervisor on a weekly, if not daily basis to ensure that our staff are operating at the same level. And that is ultimately our same goal. It doesn't do me any justice if we have high performers and then we have low performers. We need everybody operating as far as about the same consistency. And this policies and procedures manual also gives them those marching orders as far as what those expectations are. InterGov software, you're going to hear me plug at this at least for another few months, is that I think that this, I cannot understate how important this program has been. We've also have brought on board a system analyst to ensure that our system is always running at peak performance and looking at ways that we can actually upgrade and improve some of our policy, our processes. But this is what allows us to do some of the data analysis that we're able to do. Out of that, one of our things that we've done is always constantly looking at the design of our environmental code districts. It's actually a complex, mathematical equation as far as it takes into account how many proactive violations have been identified, how many complaints have been submitted by residents, how much surface area, how many roads a code officer would actually have to traverse to get to different properties. It takes in account some of our property conditions throughout the community, some census data as well. So all of that was taken into account when we designed our code areas. So the reason why I put up our map is that out of there we have about approximately 41,000 rooftops that we divide among 10 code officers. And the way that we designed it is to maximize those resources that were allocated to ensure that there is very little waste as far as time goes out in the field, and what my expectations as far as looking at their productivity to ensure that we are on target. So I thought I would highlight some of those objectives that we have accomplished as far as one of your policy goals for my department. Our vacant property yes.
When you were making the decisions on how big these different areas were, did you look at how old each neighborhood was? I mean, did that go into the deal? We have these houses are older, so they have more code violations than others. Because I can see some big differences in sizes of different.
And that was definitely taken into account. So if you look at some of our newer parts of Mesquite, the southern portion, you can see those areas are a lot bigger. Well, that's because the property conditions of those areas are much, we don't see as many property conditions. So that what I mean by that is fences, structures deteriorating, so painting issues, protective treatment, if you will. But if you look up north of some of our more established neighborhoods, you see that those areas are a lot smaller. And that's because we see a lot more of those property maintenance issues that we're on the lookout for. So that definitely was taken into account.
Okay, thank you.
I'll tie in a little bit with my distinguished colleague, Mr. Burrows. And I've said this our last time. First of all, I think a lot of progress is being made, and I'm very grateful for that. Y'all are doing good work. I always talk about balance and practicality, and I just hope that we continue to keep a focus of our newer neighborhoods. We don't have a choice but to be a little pickier to keep those nicer, longer. And our older neighborhoods, I want to make sure that our 30, 40, and 50-year residents who, 9 times out of 10 are taking pretty good care of their properties. There may be a few minor things here and there that aren't 100%, but they're clean, the lawn's mowed, the house is in good structure, and they see properties on their street that are just horrific. I want to make sure that they know that when we give them a notice for some of the smaller things, that they don't have to worry about being hammered, right away or have to spend a bunch of money when they're just doing the best that they can, versus making sure that we are putting the hammer on those other folks on the street who do not care at all. I want to make sure those residents in those first neighborhoods who are doing the right thing 95% of the time know that, we may remind them, hey, you got to take care of this or take care of that, but, they're not going to get a citation if they have leaves here and there, or if their sidewalks, this or that, are a little bit, out of place. And I think we're doing that, and I'm encouraged because more residents are telling me they are starting to call the inspector and ask for time, and we need that to happen. So, we want that to happen too. But a lot of those seniors, I don't want them to have that fear that, oh my gosh, my numbers on the back of my house weren't right, or whatever it was, when I'm doing the right thing all the rest of the time. I don't want them to have that fear. So I just want us to keep that focus of the balance and practicality.
Sure, it's a balance, and that's well taken, but what you can do for me as far as elected officials is continue to encourage residents to contact the inspector. If they get that notice of violation, it has our contact, email, phone number. If they contact us, if we see that there's some type of a hardship, that's where we partner with our new Neighborhood Vitality Division and see if there's something that we can do to help the resident if there is some type of a hardship. But all of that occurs in the conversation between us and the resident, and if that doesn't happen, there's just no way for us to know. But I think that y'all are doing a good job of asking residents to contact us, and that's one ask that I have for you is continue to do so, because we do. If we come across something that we definitely don't want to come off. We want to have a compassionate side as well, as far as some of our staff goes. And if we find that there's something in a resident that needs help, we're going to do our best to help that resident resolve that issue.
One issue that comes to my mind most recent is there's a couple in Rowanwood Hills that the husband's a Vietnam veteran in his 70s with some health issues, and they're both living on fixed incomes, and they got a notice about a tree stump. And I wish they'd have called about that first, because they spent $200 that they didn't have to fix the tree stump. But then, fortunately, she did call and got some help on some other issues with tree trimming. And so, again, just communication, and
Sure.
we'll do our part as well to help you on that. But
Sure, I appreciate
and that's not
it.
me complaining about y'all on the tree stump. It just hurts me that they had to do without that $200 and didn't know. But we'll keep pushing the communication part.
Sure, and I appreciate that.
I wanted to ask you, I like that map. I get into maps, and I know this is D1, D2, and all that, right, through D10. And I've been working with a church in regards to adopting a specific area, and there's this, and you know about this church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church,
Yes,
and the 805 cares, and the 805 is the 805 neighborhood, that is the number given, 805 given by
So
code?
there is a district, and those are representative here. There's also subsections of each district, so very similar to a police beat. So those are called areas. So as far as the 805 goes, it's District 8, Area 5. And
District 8, Area 5?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Area 5. And so they're all set up in all the different areas. And I think it's really something perhaps to consider, and even I'd like to reach out to more congregations or groups for adopting an area. District 8, Area 5. So basically, how many areas are there? Like, take for instance, that purple in the middle above the blue. Well, what consists of an area? Is it 3 or 4 blocks, or what consists of an area?
We use, the way that we break up our areas is that it's very similar to the census tracts, is how we break ours up, because that way we can run census data, so we can look at demographical information as far as when we're designing our overall districts, right? So we take into account, to answer directly your question, is we use census areas, and then that helps make up our districts.
So it's not necessarily X amount of blocks consists for Area 5 or Area 6 or whatever?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Well, I just wanted to kind of think about that, because I think it'd be a great project for different organizations, different groups, adopting an area, keeping up with that area, different homes.
Then you'll be really excited of some of the programs that we're at least brainstorming for neighborhood vitality, because we understand that congregations, they are part of the community, and to involve them more as far as some of the issues that we're seeing as far as appearances and conditions. So Yolanda is already reaching out. She's had multiple meetings with some congregations, so see some more outreach moving forward.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to talk about vacant properties. Our vacant property maintenance program, this is one of our newer programs. We really kicked this off about this fall, November timeframe, where we mailed out letters to property owners that we knew of, that they were property owners as far as vacant structures or just vacant tracts. So we have reached out right now in our current database, and this is a living document. We have changes of properties, and you on a regular basis see items in front of you for the city has either obtained some of those, or it's a living document, if you will. So currently we have 564 total properties on our vacant property database. Out of those, we have 296 residential properties with 209 commercial and 59 other. And other is going to be agricultural properties. It's going to include some special circumstances as far as in that number. We have contracted 65 of these properties have received the first of their two triggers as far as before going on a rotating schedule. And that's ultimate goal of the program is that if you receive two contracts in a 365-day period, you will be placed on an automatic property maintenance program. We haven't had any actually trigger, but we have 65 that are just one away from being put on that automatic maintenance schedule program. So, and that was something that that council allocated as far as funding for us to have a contractor that will be maintaining these for those residents or those property owners that fail to comply with the program. We do, as far as recoup fundings, we do place liens on properties each time we abate issues. And our high-intensity code officer, this is another item that was approved by council that we, I believe 2 years ago, that we obtained. This is one of his projects that he oversees. So, again, this is a result of something that you have provided to us to ensure that we are being more aggressive.
On the liens, and not just on the vacant properties, but although specifically on the vacant properties, what is our ultimate success in collection of those liens? What's the short-term success? What's the long-term success? Because I see a lot of properties and being contracted, therefore we're contracting and then we're placing liens on property. What's our collections?
We're about 40% now, and that don't be discouraged with that number because it's actually a lot of our newer liens. We see a lot higher rate of compliance. Some of the outstanding or on the books liens are a lot of structures that now we're starting to develop policies of if they hit certain thresholds that we start the foreclosure process on those. So those are programs that we are starting to develop some procedures for. So we are looking at an aggressive manner as far as for that outstanding or on the book liens to be able to recoup those. But if anybody tries to refinance a house, try to sell a property, they have to settle with us before any of those actions can take place. So sometimes there's a little bit of a delay as far as being able to get repayment on those liens.
So you're saying that typically a newer placed lien has a significantly higher collection rate?
That's what we are. And I would have to ask Debbie Moll and we could get something put together. But in my experience, when I'm signing, because I sign off on every lien that we place on a property, and then we look at what we're getting repaid. But we do seem to, and I'm not sure the exact reason. Maybe it's because it's a first time. A lot of these, you saw our numbers increase as far as the number of contracts. So a lot of these folks are receiving a contract or a lien for the first time, so they're kind of, as far as they want to resolve that really quickly, whereas before we were contracting a lot of repeat offenders, if you will, is kind of my rough estimate or observation.
And my last follow-up on this, and I appreciate all of that. Typically, how many commercial and how many residential non-homestead are we foreclosing on as a result of these liens? Typically, just generally speaking.
And I can't
if you
really,
know, and if you don't,
and I don't have that.
I don't want you to make up a number, obviously. So, I mean, you can get with me later and let me know that. Just curious as to what that amount was, and basically, how many non-homestead residential properties are we foreclosing on annually? And taking into possession of the city of Mesquite based on this? I'd like to know that.
There's many aspects to our foreclosure process, and we are fine-tuning some of those thresholds. So we're trying to become more aggressive in the foreclosure process. And Valerie Bradley's kind of handling that right now, and we can provide an update to council. I think that's a good suggestion to see where we're at, and it will show that we are much more aggressive than we used to be.
And that's an important point. We are constantly fine-tuning our processes, so looking at ways, our direction was to be more aggressive, and how can we fine-tune to meet that goal. So, but I can get with Valerie, and we can provide that breakdown for you. Our Code Ambassador program, this is one that I was really intrigued at, because when I was hired as Director of Neighborhood Services, this was one of the first projects that I was tasked with developing. So I think that if you ask anybody that I know, I tend to over design some programs. So, but I think that the work was well worth it, because we see a really good work product from these volunteers. We see about a 50% success rate, and to some that might seem, well, that doesn't seem great. But the way I look at it, if we have 2 cases and 1 case is taken off of our staff so that they can focus on more complex issues, to me that's a success. This is also engaging our residents. They become ambassadors, so they can help educate their neighbors if there's a question as far as what a code violation is. And, you know, part of this program is we're fine-tuning it as well. If you have a resident that's interested to learn more about code, encourage them to attend this training program. They don't have to opt to be a code ambassador, if you will, that's actually going out there driving around looking for violations. But if they're interested in learning more about what our code officers do, because one of the requirements is they are required to do a ride-out. They're required to do 2 one-hour ride-outs with a code officer so that they can see exactly what our code officers go through, and also help them, if they're going to be going out looking for violations, and further train them on how to do that properly. So this is something that in the last quarter they identified 346 violations with a total volunteer hours of 216. Now, when they mirror the same process as a code officer, so they go out, they identify a violation, a notice is then generated, and each notice is reviewed by one of our staff to ensure that there is a proper violation there. But we look at the pictures that they take. 10 days later, they are required or expected to go back and do a reinspection. So not only are they identifying it, but they're being part of the solution. That any resident today can report a code violation, but these residents trained residents do a little bit above and beyond, and they go out and they do their rechecks. If they don't see that it's been resolved, then that's where our staff can actually, it's like passing the baton. Our staff will look at what levels of enforcement we can take from that point on, whether that's abatement or a citation or both, to ensure that we're receiving compliance on those violations that are identified by our code ambassadors. So again, this is a fantastic program. We've actually heard from about 3 other communities that we've provided all of the details as far as how the program was designed. City of Plano, Allen, and Sherman was our recent one, are looking at emulating the program that we have here in Mesquite. So we find it exciting that it's a sign that we're doing something right, especially when people want to copy us. So again, if you have somebody that's interested, encourage them to attend one of our Code Ambassador classes, and I would be happy to educate them. Some of the challenges that environmental code staff see is, again, you heard me talk about vacant properties, but it's a challenge. You know, you saw that 65 of our vacant properties have already been contracted once. I would anticipate that we're going to see that number grow, because we have not even hit our growing season yet. So it does take some staff time to manage some of these vacant properties and ensure that we are putting them on these vacant property maintenance programs that we have in place. But I wanted to point this out because this is something that we've heard feedback from you. These vacant properties are an eyesore in our community, and it does take quite a bit of time to ensure that they are being properly maintained. And I think that we'll gauge at the end of the summer exactly how many properties are being maintained as far as the program that I spoke about previously. But we're looking at making things look better in our neighborhood, so that's the ultimate goal. Hoarding and nuisance premises. This is something that is a challenge for our staff, and that is just because the time it takes to resolve some of these issues. And one that I like to point out, one that we're actually working with Mr. Midclose on off Devonshire, is a good example. We have an instance where an individual brings a lot of materials to their house, and we receive those complaints from residents, and as far as that are passed on to us as well through the city manager's office. And the challenge is that sometimes they screen it. So in this instance, the fence is a board on board. Fourth Amendment, we cannot peer over somebody's fence, but we can obtain a administrative search warrant. But some of these processes take a lot of time to resolve. And a lot of times there's also an underlying issue, whether it's a mental health issue as far as the residents go. We see some folks that have been addicted, as far as substance abuse issues, that they have stopped that act, but it's replaced with another behavior. So this is sometimes there's underlying issues that we're finding. Also, sometimes folks are consolidating properties, so it takes a lot of time as far as to work these cases. But it does have an impact on surrounding properties, and we're trying our best to resolve those issues, but they do take a little time, and we appreciate some of the patience that our residents, show us as we work some of these. But just so you know, these types of issues or cases, they are a challenge for our staff as far as our time to close or resolve those. Homelessness, this is something that I wanted to point out as well. Just a remote nature as far as some of the encampments that we're starting to discover. We have some instances where we've discovered encampments in drainage ways. So actually, it becomes a life safety issue. We, rather than having our fire, or public safety officials having to go in and help residents homeless folks from being endangered, we're trying to be proactive. A good example was on range. You might have noticed that those trees have been trimmed up. That's because we saw that there was some activity going on in that wooded area. We actually worked with the property owner to kind of explain some of the challenges that we were experiencing, and they opted to do away with some of the screening materials. So now you can almost see through that property. So as we discover that there's a repeat instance going on, then we're working with property owners to help resolve some of the issues. But again, it's a sensitive issue in our community, but we are, as far as code staff, we are involved in part of the team as well as with police and fire with this issue.
Raymond, I appreciate you bringing this up, and it is a very sensitive issue, and this is a little bit more beyond what your department's responsibility is day to day and my thoughts here, but I'm glad you brought it up because I do get a lot of comments from residents all over town, especially here lately on the far north end, concerned, and most of them are not against people who are in struggle. They're just concerned about some of the worst incidents of, relieving themselves at different places, and some of the ones who are probably more mentally challenged who get a little bit abrasive with residents. And, we've just got to keep, as a council, we've got to have more discussions as we go forward. And this is not just a Mesquite issue, of course, but of how we can be compassionate and help folks with our resources at the same time, make sure that, residents feel safe. And it's just a complicated issue, but I'm glad that you brought it up.
No problem. And we are looking at constantly ways to improve, so how can we connect some of these individuals to existing social services? But a lot of it, and I'm sure Chief Cato can attest to this, a lot of times there's a trust issue among this population. They just don't trust us as governmental officials, but sometimes we have successes where we connect them with social services and they're able to succumb that challenge. So again, we are looking at working with some of the existing resources in our community to see if there's long-term fixes that we can implement.
My question, there's nothing worse than driving down through a neighborhood and seeing a house boarded up or a commercial building boarded up. I mean, it just brings down the neighborhood. You have safety issues with, your fire police if something you don't know what's going on there because it's boarded up. Are we aggressively trying to get those properties either taken care of to where they have to be opened up back up? I mean, what is the deal? I mean, how long can the property just stay boarded up forever and ever?
Well, the challenge is if it's adhering to our international property maintenance code, so it's not it's not an unsafe structure. It hasn't deteriorated or reached a point of deterioration that is not safe. It can be boarded up. The tools that we use as far as aggressiveness is if we have to maintain that structure, and we come up with that trigger as far as where we start looking at if we can foreclose, if it's looking at title searches and everything that's involved with that, then that becomes the tool that we can use. But again, as Mr. Kahili said, that's one that we're fine-tuning as far as how we can better use that as a tool on some of these properties that you're speaking of.
Go ahead.
So if it's boarded up, then we don't know what's going. Is there a time frame that we can actually go in to see if it's fallen down on the inside, which would make it an unsafe structure, or are we just looking at the outside of it?
We're looking for signs of deterioration. So a lot of times, if you see an exterior issue, there's also interior issues. So for instance, if there's some type of an opening, well, that might be an opening for some type of a rodent issue. So that would then lead to deterioration of the structure. So we look for a lot of clues as far as on the exterior that might point towards an interior issue. And we can get an administrative search warrant to inspect the interior sound, see if it is a sound structure, if we see some of those clues to ensure that it is safe.
All right.
Mr. Burrows, one of the newer steps that we're taking is with our code attorney. And so instead of waiting for a property to get to a point where it's in a deteriorating condition, we're looking at ways to address those properties to either get them occupied or removed. And we're looking at several strategies when it comes to residential structures and commercial structures. So we've targeted a few based off of the vacant property list that we're going to address in that manner. So where Raymond's having to maintain a lot of these properties, we're also trying to look at reducing those numbers through different strategies other than code.
As far as some of the successes, as far as implementing communications and coordination among neighborhood crime watch groups, is kind of evolving those organizations, some more community or neighborhood groups. So that was the establishment of our Neighborhood Vitality Division. And I wanted to highlight three things that Yolanda was tasked with focusing on. One is performing an assessment of community-wide of what's out there, what existing organizations are already in existence that we can then help bring along, or where is there a need? Where can we focus on helping establish a neighborhood organization if need be? So we are coordinating with Mesquite Police Department. This is a partnership. We can't do or accomplish what we're trying to do without the police department. This goes into some of the things, Mr. Archer, that you were touching on, broken windows. I mean, not only is code a part of the solution, but neighborhood vitality and engaging the residents. We cannot be successful without their help, and also working with the police department to ensure that we're moving and have their buy-in. Yolanda has been busy. She's had 32 meetings, and I have a breakdown of that, but she's been out in the community, and I'm sure many of you have seen her around, and she is a highly energetic person, so I'm glad that I have her on my team and that she's out there coordinating with those neighborhoods. Our neighborhood summit, our first event, we had 109 attendees, and if you would have asked me going into this, what would have been successful? It probably would have been in the 40 range. So we were blown away by 109 attendees, and it was a fairly, I would say, it was a positive atmosphere. The residents truly took some information that we got, and we've already heard back from a few. We did a survey after or near the end of the event, and it was positive feedback that we received. They are energetic and they want to see change in their neighborhoods, and we are excited to point them in the right direction and give them the tools that they need. We will have, going on to that last point, additional trainings. We have 2 workshops that are scheduled where neighborhood leaders will receive additional training, additional tools that they might be able to utilize on how to engage their neighbors. And I think that that's a multitude of different activities. That's walking the neighborhoods, knocking on doors, getting to know neighbors, and just encouraging that level of engagement will have, I think, a multitude of successes down the road, because you're not going to be able to incite change if you just pull into your garage or into your driveway, go inside your house, and not really be part of the solution. So again, this is something that Yolanda is very excited, and moving forward, I think we're going to see some great things out of that division. Some budget offers that we anticipate that we will be presenting to you as to council is that and I think in my last update to you I had a teaser for this, but this is something that is a current existing priority that you have identified, and that is improve conditions and increase value of residential properties by developing an incentive program to stimulate owner investment. So we have done a survey of other communities that have programs such as this. We are recommending in this next budget a property enhancement program. The next slide, I have a little bit, I think Chief Cato used the term, put some meat on the bones. Before I go to this slide, I just want to preface that this is not final by any means. This is just 2 examples of what we think would work based on communities that we've evaluated, but we will be presenting some more concrete details, briefing in the future, if you will, also. To go along with that, to seek your input as far as what you're wanting to see. So 2 examples, option 1, option 2. One would be a 50% grant that residents could apply for. Some of the, and I'm not going to read this word for word, but some of the eligibility stipulations is that we would have considerations for income brackets. For instance, if somebody is applying for the maximum $3,000, we are trying to target those that are in need the most. So if somebody has more financial means than, let's say, another person because they have a higher income in their family, then we're trying to give more to those in need. So we're not saying that somebody that is grossing more income wouldn't be eligible for the program. They might just be eligible at a lesser amount. So this is something that we've seen other communities do as far as trying to use their funding for the most good. Again, what we're going to be looking at is some thresholds, and this is just all preliminary type information, but to give you a little bit more ideas of some options for you. But we can put some thresholds as far as home age. 1985 or before is what one of our cities in North Texas, city of Louisville, put. I thought that was actually a pretty good idea because we want to target some of our older structures. So that's something that they put in there. Of course, in any one of our options, you got to be current on taxes and liens. If we've had to place a lien on your property, that's going to have to be settled as far as before you would be eligible for this. And then we're also asking that it be done in a timely manner. 6 months for receiving a quote to actually getting the work done, we feel like is a fairly fair expectation from our residents. With option 1, we would ask for, or looking at about a $60,000 ask out of the general fund. Based on how many, again, not everybody is going to get that maximum $3,000 allocation or matching portion. So don't think that, that might not help a lot of people looking at that number. But I believe that the city of Louisville, their average, if you look at their project average, that they allocated somewhere in the $1,500 to $2,000 range as far as what they are seeing with what residents apply for. A second option, if you want to ensure that residents have more skin in the game, if you will, but that we still have the ability to help, is to look at about a 30% match grant. This is something I actually kind of moved this number. The City of Dallas has a really good program as well. Theirs is 25%. So again, this is something that we can adjust. But we would be able to fund bigger projects, retaining walls, some of those bigger and higher end fixes by lessening the matching amount, but also increasing the amount that they could possibly get back. So that's the reason why there's a bit of a difference there. Some stipulations I thought was a good idea. This route that the community next door to us has implemented is they look at putting limits on DCAD appraisals. So if your property exceeds a certain amount, you would not be considered. Again, you would have to be current on all taxes and liens, and that you again do this in a reasonable time frame, so about 6 months as well. So those are two different ways. Not to say that these are the two only ways, but this just at least gives you a litmus test, or as far as what exists out there in the community and what we think might be able to be done. And I'll be meeting with our city manager and with my managing director, Valerie Bradley, to kind of fine-tune some options to present to you so that you might be able to have a more robust definition of what some of these programs might entail as far as project requirements. Any questions on this? All right.
Just get a little bit of feedback. Are we going in the right direction? Is that when we had set that goal a while back? I just want to make sure that in concept, I know Mr. Miklos has given a suggestion as well, but are we in the right ballpark?
Yeah, I like it a lot. I would encourage us to think about what kind of stipulations we could put to try to get as many people on like a waiting list, do as much up front as possible to load it, and then if we got to go back in year 2 and start crossing some of those people off, I think the sooner we get investment in our neighborhoods and our community, the better, instead of opening like a window that would close each year, just encouraging, now, urgency.
And one thing I didn't mention, a majority of the projects would be focused at exterior improvements. Something that we would see an immediate improvement in a neighborhood is by fixing either, let's say, siding or painting or a sidewalk, or not necessarily a sidewalk, but maybe a walkway to their house that's deteriorated. So we're looking at those exterior kind of high wind, high visibility type projects.
Dan, you had something?
Yeah, I was going to mention sidewalks, because I'm thinking about priority of the older neighborhoods, and some of the places where the new schools are coming up, elementary schools, little children walking, and a lot of sidewalks that need some attention for these little ones, because we want to encourage children to walk to school. So I did want to mention sidewalks. So I think, it's great.
Bruce?
Well, so much I always have to say about this. I believe deeply that if we want cleaner neighborhoods and we want safer neighborhoods, then the interaction and the participation by our residents, many of whom are not participating right now in any way, is critical. So I first want to affirm again what took place at that neighborhood summit. Like you, Raymond, I was overwhelmed and surprised in a good way at the number of folks that were there, including the number of folks who are not our regular partakers, our regular involved folks. There were some neighborhoods there that I've not seen represented before, and I'm really grateful that the mayor and the mayor pro tem and Mr. Burrows were all there in attendance as well. I think that spoke well for things. And now I do want to say one thing about that meeting. I think that there were some residents who watched it or were there, who heard the suggestions and the ideas, who may have thought that there's a one-way way to do things. Now, I want to make sure that they understand that a lot of those discussions were suggestions and ideas, but every neighborhood can do things however they think is best to do it. So there's no one way, but fantastic ideas discussed. You touched on reproducing leaders. I can't stress how important that is, because when we have council meetings or we have these town halls, we see a lot of the same folks there. I'm very thankful that they're there, but at some point, who will take their place? We've got some great crime watch leaders, but eventually they're going to burn out and get tired and do something else. And they need, I believe, our help, not just the staff, but those of us on the council. They need our motivation and inspiration and support to help reproduce new faces and mentor folks. So hope we'll walk beside them. And last thing I want to say is, if you do walk around some neighborhoods, as you just mentioned, Saturday I walked through over by Motley Elementary, and because I guess it was the first day of no rain, there were a lot of people outside. And these are people I'm pretty certain are not plugged in any way. Every ethnicity, every economic background, a lot of Spanish-speaking folks, and Councilman, I'm going to keep pushing you to come help me talk to those folks. But the point is, they liked being smiled at. They liked being waved to. They appreciated me saying, hey, how's it going today? And if we could keep doing that and reproduce that more and more, we might discover that there's people who'd like to be involved but just have no clue where to get started. So I hope that more of that will come from all this effort here. And thank you for all your hard work and your team.
And I couldn't have laid up a better shot as far as plugging our next Town Hall Tuesday, which is next week, over neighborhood vitality and some of the exact things that you touched on, succession planning in neighborhoods. So how to build a robust and a deeper bench as far as our neighborhoods go for those being involved are one of the things that Yolanda is actually going to be touching on. So that is a great plug, but we will have some additional trainings that I think will help us accomplish that goal.
Greg?
So one of the concerns that I have with the options that you've laid out is the amounts, and just curious as to what that will ultimately, whether that will truly make impacts in some situations and in most situations. And what I would hate to see is contractors beginning to take advantage of the fact that this program is out there and putting people into situations where they're either using that part of that program to finance something larger that gets them beyond their means, or things like that. So I just want to figure out how we can protect folks from being preyed upon that participate in this program, but also making sure that even if we have to increase the amount to have effects, I would like to see us increase the maximum allocation and do fewer so that we actually have impact rather than doing more and having just nominal impacts on particular properties. So,
Thank you.
That's great feedback, and we can make some adjustments to our recommendations and then gauge you further as far as where we're going and if we're going in the right direction.
yeah, and I guess by way of example, what you could do for the pre-meeting is kind of give us an idea of, in a house that's built before 1985, what $3,000 on the exterior might do.
Okay.
And that would kind of give us a better idea on where to move.
Projects and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and I'll be sure when I come back before you, I'll have some examples. Before I move on, any other questions, comments, concerns?
Go ahead.
Okay. This is my last slide, but the other ask will be for some assistance for Yolanda. We actually had always anticipated having 2 positions allocated for neighborhood vitality. We had to do some internal adjustments as far as add a position that we didn't anticipate. And that's our intergov analyst. So we had to move some items around. So we will be requesting a budget offer as far as funding that specialist position. That would also be a force multiplier ultimately for Yolanda and for neighborhood vitality. So.
Very good.
With that, I know that it's lunchtime, and I do not want to hold us up any longer. So any questions?
Anything else? Great job. I think it's good information. Looks like our Deputy Mayor Pro Tem has a comment.
Just a quick question about, because I was curious about the board-on-board screening and how we deal with that. That requires a warrant then to go and see what's in the, if there's concerns?
Yes, it does.
That's one of those warrant situations?
Yes, it does.
And as far as the homeless, what is the direction that we're doing with the homeless that are found, sending them off somewhere, or Or what is the direction that's?
Well, our police department will make initial contact, but our staff will also, if we see that there might be issues, other social services, we'll call some of our existing social services here in Mesquite to see if we can't find them help. I know that we're engaging conversations with some of our social services to see if there's better tools or method or approaches that we can take. There's not a perfect answer for that, unfortunately, and I'll be the first and being honest when I tell you that. But we're looking at how we can improve those interactions that will result in a successful outcome.
Okay.
And Dan, if I can weigh in just real quickly, because I know it's not necessarily Raymond's purview as far as his department to handle that. And I hadn't really talked about this much. I've been to several conferences in the last 3 or 4 months about this issue, as well as have met with some of our folks in social services here and Sharing Life and some of our staff. And I've been trying to start some conversations because it is an issue in Mesquite that we're going to have to be dealing with. It's probably a longer term and a much bigger discussion. And I know we have some things in place that Cliff and others can share that are currently going on, but I know that I hadn't really said a lot about it because I'm trying to get a handle on what is our community-wide response. I mean, we're doing some things right now that I think are important, but what I'm finding, and it's a little bit of me talking, but there's so many levels of this homelessness. We start talking about the guys that are in the tents or the guys that are in the trees. Well, that's one piece. We talk about the school districts. That's another piece. We talk about the families that are out because they've lost their jobs. That's another piece. We talk about, it's a multi-level, multifaceted situation. And in my opinion, we've got to look at all of these different revenues, these circumstances, and how are we going to use our, what I call, very limited resources, but to come together. And I think it's going to take community involvement. I think it's going to take all of us to really do that, and it's probably going to be a piece at a time. And I'm finding that the challenges are greater than the resources right now. That's a long answer, but I've been trying to figure out something to do about this issue.
And I agree totally, and I know it's a wide spectrum because even when you think about the schools and their latest number, they give you 736 children in the MISD that are homeless. And I know that's all kinds of situations, kids living with aunts or uncles and kids living just different places, and so that's a huge number. And so I get it, it's the big spectrum. And the only other question I had was, do we have a handle of a number or a ballpark figure of actually how many houses we do have in Mesquite that are boarded up?
That was that part of that vacant property number includes the ones that we don't have them broken down whether they're boarded up or not. We just know that those are residential properties that are vacant.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Cliff, I just had a quick question. How many residential properties does the city own that we are maintaining?
Does the city own?
Yeah.
Buildings or not buildings?
Just residential structures that we are.
We have 44 in trust right now.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.